good job yesterday.
Madam,
Ji.
I propose to the Honourable House that the Repealing and Amending Bill 1999 be approved by this House. It seeks to repeal wholly or partly 357 different legislations. Some of them are sought to be amended. These are broadly in three categories. I'll just explain each of the three categories. The first category, to which most of them pertain, these are all amending legislations. There is already a principal legislation. Subsequently, an amending law is passed. By virtue of that Amendment Act, the amendment gets incorporated in the principal legislation and it becomes a part of the principal legislation. But that law, by virtue of which the amendment was passed, continues to occupy the statute book. And under Section 6, capital A of the General Clauses Act, the amending bill actually becomes redundant, and the repeal of the amending bill does not in any way affect the operation of the principal legislation into which it has been incorporated. And therefore, this is a regular exercise which the Department of Legislation does. It's called cleansing the statute book or scavenging the statute book, that all those enactments which are occupying the statute book but serve no purpose are sought to be repealed. So the first category, most of these belong to the category of those amending bills. The second category are those which were legislations which lapsed by virtue of time. The legislation was for a limited period. It lapsed when that period was over. But in order to remove it from the statute book, a specific repeal legislation is required. The second are a few laws in that category. The third is an exercise which we do, which happens but rarely in cases of some legislations, where while the legislation, after being approved by this House, certain printing errors or other errors are seen and are noticed regularly when we review those legislations. Those are sought to be corrected by virtue of an amendment. So the first schedule to this Act comprises of legislations which are 355 in the first and the second category, that is the amending laws or the laws which have already lapsed. The second is those cases where certain errors had crept in when the primary legislation was drafted. In this case, it happened in two cases: the Indian Succession Act in relation to the succession of those Parsi gentlemen who expire without a will intestate and without any lineal descendant as to what would be the order of inheritance. And the words grandparents' children should actually have been grandparents' parents' children. And this was an error which was noticed in the schedule, so that is sought to be corrected. The second amendment is to the Code of Criminal Procedure, to Section 377, which deals with unnatural offences. In the original legislation, it said ditto because it copied what the previous legislation, that is 376 and 376B, mentioned. Once there was an amendment and 376D, C and D got added, the ditto was not changed and it became dittoing what was the new piece of legislation. So technical error came into Section 377, which was noticed in the course of the enactment being implemented, and that error is sought to be corrected by this amendment bill. The Standing Committee has examined each of these 357 legislations in detail and has been unanimously returned a report that these require to be repealed or amended. And I propose to the Honourable House that this bill be adopted.